And what I want to talk about is a build-up on the very wonderful presentation by our dear sister on what it's like to be of second generation or a 1.5 generation. The reason why I'm using English in this is, like I said, I prepared this material in English for a particular audience, and I'm happy to share this with you. Between home and here, identity, belonging, and the church in Denmark. We are gathered here from different cultures, but we are also gathered here as people of different generations. And when we talk about people who come from another culture, which I am also from another culture, I come from Africa, but I come from Nigeria. I am married to a Danish woman, so there are a certain level of experience that some people can share here that I cannot really relate with, because that's not my own story. I often say that those of us who are married into Danish culture is like following a football player that gave you a VIP card to go up, sit, and so you don't know the experience of what it's like to come through the gate like many other people have experienced. You have other challenges, but when you come as someone married into the culture, there are so many things that are given to you almost without you knowing. You have a family, you're married into a family, you have brothers, you have sisters that you call, in-laws, and learning the culture suddenly almost is at your doorstep. But there are people who come here as expats or students. They are not married into the culture, they are all on their own. There are people who, by virtue of wars in their countries, came here as asylum seekers and have to seek out knowledge of the culture and build their own identity within this culture on their own. And that can be very, very tough. And that is why, all those who are working with migrants in different parts of Denmark, the work they're doing is so important. It's really, really important. In Denmark, when we talk about migrants, like I said, the tendency is to lump everybody into one pool of basket as migrants. And that is true. Migrants are migrants. But there are categories of migrants. And in the context of what we've heard today, we often have what is called the first generation migrants. The idea of the first generation migrants are basically the first group of people that left their country and came to a new context. They are the ones that are called first generation. So I would be called a first generation from among my own people, because I came here. I wasn't born here. I wasn't brought here by another parent. So I came here by virtue of my choice to love somebody. And then I came here so I'm of the first generation. In Denmark, the first generation make up 12.6% of the migrant population in Denmark. And then there's what we call the descendants. According to the Danish statistics, there's what is called the descendants, efterkommere, of the migrants. Those are kids of those who came here, known as the first generation. So there are two categories here. We have what we call the 1.5 generation. The 1.5 generation are those kids who were born in the parents' country, and the parents came here with them when they were probably around 6 to 13. So that's what we call the 1.5 generation. Then there is what we also call the second generation. The second generation are those who were born in the new country that their parents came into. So you would see that the first generation is that willingly left. The second generation, the 1.5 generation, are those that were taken by those who willingly left to come with them, whether by design or by necessity to have to move. Then you also have the generation that were born here. So every connection they have to their parents' country is based on the food, the music, and the movies, or even the news they play at home. Because somehow the parents would want to pass on to the children some sorts of value and experience of what they themselves came from. And these categories of generation that we're looking at don't respond the same way, and their experiences are not the same. So if I take migrant church as an example, migrant church by default is always designed for the first generation. They are the ones who long for a community that reminds them of something that looks like what they left from their home country to be here. So people who have experienced what's like to be Christians or experienced what's like to sing in their church, they have a tradition. When they come here, they are the ones longing for it. But also the 1.5 generation, to a certain extent, have a certain level of memory that is not retained for a very long time. I think that my friend Olu would identify with that. He's to some extent a 1.5 migrant when you moved to the UK, because you lived in Sierra Leone and then grew the rest of your life in the UK, you know. And oftentimes there is a challenge between that generation and the 1.5 generation. They know some things about what their parents came out from, but sometimes they are caught in between, negotiating between their new context and the context where they had left. And that negotiation is not only happening between the society that they've come into, but in reverse, it's also happening at home between them and their parents. So oftentimes many young Africans who were brought here as children, when they come here, they have new sets of values, new sets of perspective to life, and would want to explore new things, but the parents would say, remember where you're coming from. Remember the values we teach them. And then there's often that tension between the parents and the children. And sometimes the parents don't understand also the kind of context the children find themselves when they're out of the threshold of their home. Because for many kids, for example, if they step out of the home, they become Danish. They're part of the wider Danish society. But when they return home, they become Ghanaians or Nigerians, because all the music, the food, and everything is what their parents are used to. Then there is the last one I mentioned, which is the second generation. Their life is just here. And I think about the rise of Afro music. I speak from an African context here. Most of the people who have made Afro music and Nigerian food or African food popular, they are actually not the first generation. It is the 1.5 generation and the second generation who are seeking for identity, something they can call their own, something that they can belong to. Like she shared with us here, there is always that tension of where do I actually belong for the 1.5 generation. Because they grew up here, they went to school here, they learned how to speak Danish language, and they have interacted with many ethnic Danish people. There is that sense of feeling like my childhood, my upbringing is Danish. Even though I left whatever country I was coming from at the age of 6 or at the age of 7, but I feel more Danish. But still there's that personal conflict of who am I? I'm outside, I'm Danish, but when I'm home, I'm another person. How do I live with the tension of these two? Now, you know, I wanted to give an example of a first generation conflict. It could be a lady who came from Peru. She was a teacher, first generation now we're talking about. She was a teacher, she had a good life, but for some reason she had to leave and come to Denmark. But when she came to Denmark, she realized that she could not use her certificate in Denmark. She did everything that she could to be accepted because she said, I taught English, I taught all of those things. But Denmark would not recognize her certificate because they think that it was not good enough to the Danish standard, so she would not get a job. And she has to leave seeing her dream of working as a teacher, which she was educated for, kind of flip through her fingers. And what has become of hope for her are two things. She has to live for her children, whom she wants to give a future better than the one that she had. So sometimes you find first generation people almost literally longing for home, but have to stay back as a form of sacrifice for the sake of their children, the 1.5 generation or the second generation. And sometimes that's the conflict that most first generation people go through. They struggle with that. And so sometimes that church that they go to or that ethnic group that they belong to becomes that place where they reinforce their own self-identity. And sometimes the church plays a very good role in terms of helping them with resilience to the society that they belong to. A second example I would give is the 1.5 generation. For example, Alfred came from Ghana. Alfred, came as a 6-year-old, grew up, went to school because he had already reached school age and made friends, went to soccer and did everything as every other young Danish person would become. And Alfred learned Danish so well that he was the one who was reading to his parents every letter they received from the commune. He helped them translate everything that they needed to do. So when Alfred was home, he is Ghanaian, but when he was out, he is Danish. But Alfred had a struggle That even though he personally was wanting to identify as a Dane, but he was always reminded that because of his skin color and the way he spoke, or the way he looked, that he was not fully Danish. So as he grew up, Alfred started fighting an identity crisis as to where he belongs to. You made a very important point when you started here, that the dominant culture is Danish. And imagine how small Alfred felt in the midst of this dominant culture where he cannot reinforce his Ghanaian culture. Because Alfred was struggling with understanding when is integration assimilation and when is assimilation supposed to be integration. Then you also have Nasrim, who comes from Syria. She was born here. So naturally, everywhere she goes, she says she's Danish. But she's always struggling with that idea that her parents are not originally Danish. Because her parents oftentimes will remind her that she is Farsi speaking. And she comes from there. She is navigating this identity where she wants to also become Danish because she has no trace whatsoever. Her history is not back home. I feel that with my kids. 2 of my kids have been to Nigeria. One at the age of 10 months. The other at the age of 3 or 4, I would say. And then the last one actually was born here, never been out of the country to Africa. So when we're talking about Nigeria, we have to take picture and show him. But even the 10-year-old, we have to tell him that you were in Nigeria. He has no connection whatsoever to Nigeria. I try to cook fufu sometimes, and I give him, and he loves fufu. He really says, Dad, when are you going to make fufu next time? When are you going to make jollof rice for me to eat? He connects with the food. But when we talk about the experience, the lived experience, he has no connection to it. And I as a first generation, would have to learn to be a good listener, to be able to understand his experience, because it's different from mine. If there's one thing that I've learned over the years, is that my childhood, my youth age, my teenage age, my youth age are so different from the children that I'm raising. Of course, even if I was raising them in Nigeria, the times would have been different. The music would have been different. The politics would have been different. But imagine raising my children in another culture that I did not grow up in. One, I did not go to kindergarten. I was born in the age where if they wanted to know if you were ready to go to school, they would ask you to put your hand across your neck. So if you were able to touch your ear, you were good to go to school. That was the generation that I was born in, right? So you had to put your hand across your head. I don't know, did they do that in Denmark? I don't know, but they did that. So you have to stand. If your hand is able to touch your other side of the ear, then you're ready to go to school. And I grew up in a home where my parents never hugged each other. My parents never hugged me, but I never doubted their love. My dad never took me to soccer. So suddenly I am in a culture married to a different person from another culture where I have to suddenly give the things I never received. I have to drive my kids to football. I have to learn to hug my kids and kiss them and tell them I love you. I have to learn to take them into bed and tuck them and read Bible stories to them and pray for them. Nobody did that to me. Nobody did that to me. So, but it came also probably because of my wife telling me, oh, you need to do this and go and tuck them in. Of course, I need to go and do this. But I'm not doing it out of a pool of experience that I've had done to me. And for many first generation, that is the challenge that is there when it comes to the issue of child upbringing. And that is where sometimes there is marked difference between a Danish kid and a 1.5 or second generation. Their experience of upbringing is absolutely unique and different. I will soon be ending, so don't worry. But how are we supposed to deal with this kind of difference? And this brings me to 4 things. We need to learn to listen to people's story. We need to learn to listen. You may have been the parents and have given birth to them, but you're in a different culture, and both of you are in a place that is entirely new. And sometimes there's a drive to want to impose the culture and our experience from where we come through, and that's perfect. But the reality and experience is different. Sorry, I timed myself. The second thing I want to say is that we need to learn from the past. That when the church had to include people from different cultures, to be inclusive, people did not all come from the same culture. They come from diverse culture. and there was always conflict. And I think that we, as first generation, you can actually have some level of conflict, cultural conflict, even in your home because of the time differences. We need to learn to open our eyes to see what God is doing in the lives of our kids, whether what they're struggling with or how God wants us to train them and raise them. It will be very important. And we need to act with love and justice to our kids and hope for the best for them.